The 11th Hour. From The Alchemist's Secret, by Isabel Cecilia Williams. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 11th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The 11th Hour. It was an ordinary tenement house of the poorest class, exactly like its neighbors, which lined both sides of the dingy street. The door was always open, more than half the time hanging by one hinge, the stairways were dark and crooked, the rooms small and dirty. In a back kitchen on the topmost floor a man sat, or rather huddled, in a chair drawn close to the stove. His eyes were closed, and his head drooped wearily against the back of the chair. That last spell of coughing had been unusually severe, and had left him weak and breathless. A plague on the cough, anyway. Why was it he could not get rid of it? The doctor from the dispensary, the district nurse, even Maggie, had assured him that with the coming of summer this cold of his would be better. Summer was here, though you would not think so to-day, with this raw east wind and drizzling rain, and instead of being better, he was worse, decidedly worse. Could it be that they were all wrong, and Nancy alone was in the right? Nancy, who, of all that approached him, was the only one who dared to tell him the truth. The truth? No, it was a lie, a lie. He was not dying. He was going to be well and strong again as soon as he could shake this cold that had settled upon him. Nancy was a meddlesome old woman. He had told her so not more than an hour ago, and had sent her off about her business. He had been harsh to her and rude, and after all she was old and had probably meant to do him a kindness. But then he was not sorry. She'd not come bothering him any more now with her dismal croakings of death and eternity. Death? He defied it. Eternity? Time enough to think of that. He opened his eyes and they rested upon the chair which Nancy had occupied 1 hour ago, which she had occupied so frequently during the past few months. She had been almost a daily visitor since he and Maggie had been living in these wretched lodgings in Nancy's Alley, as it was called. Evidently the old woman seemed to think the entire street was her personal property, and that she was responsible for the welfare of all the dwellers thereon. Well, he guessed he had taught her not to come meddling in his affairs. He hoped he had, anyway. Dying? The idea of such a thing! How dared she tell him he was dying, when every one else fed him with the hope that he would be better to-morrow, next week, next month? Ah, yes, but to-morrow never came. Or rather, when it did come, it was no longer to-morrow with its promise of renewed health. It was to-day, with the same disappointment, the same pains, the same racking cough, which he had endured on so many other to-days that had come and gone before it. Watching the chair she had so lately occupied, he could see once more the figure of Nancy, her bright eyes and cheery smile, and hear the nimble tongue which chattered so merrily or soothed so gently according to the needs of her listener. He could see the little stooped figure in its ragged gown, the work-worn hands, the smooth grey hair. He would miss her visits. Yes, indeed, he would miss them sorely. But what right had she to go talking to him of death? Still, she was old. She had been kind to him, and he had driven her away in anger. He had called her a meddlesome busybody who went about poking and prying into other people's affairs, and had ordered her to leave the house and never enter it again. "Pokin' and pryin', is it?" she had answered quietly as she made her way towards the door. He remembered now how difficult it had been for her to walk even on the level floor, what a task it must have been for her to climb those 3 long flights of stairs, as she had been doing every day for these months past. "Pokin' and pryin', is it? Maybe so. maybe so, but Nancy didn't mean it that way. No, lad, indeed she didn't. Nancy was thinking of her own boy lying at rest out yonder, with the green grass growing over him. Her own boy that went the same way you're a–going now. He's about the same age as you, too, and there's the look on your face that I seen on his so often, the desperate, despairing look that it breaks my heart to see. I figured that if you was my boy, I'd be glad for some one to tell you the truth and try to bring you back to God before it's too late. I'd figured, too, that most likely you had a mother somewheres. She may be still on the earth, praying for you and longing for you, same as I prayed and longed for my Danny for so many years. She may be in heaven looking down on us now, but wherever she is, she'll be glad to know that I tried to bring you back. It's all for her sake that I'm doing this, for the sake of your poor mother, wherever she may be." His mother! What memories that name conjured up! His mother, who had kissed and blessed him as she closed her eyes for ever, so many, many years ago. He was still looking at the chair which Nancy had occupied, but he saw it not. He was a boy once more, standing by his mother's bedside, her soft white hand in his, and was promising her. How many promises he had made, holding that dear hand for the last time, and how readily he had broken those promises, every one. His mind wandered on, and he saw himself a boy at school, a youth at college, a grown man filling a position of trust in a large business concern. In those days, wherever he might turn, there was one figure standing out before all others, one friend tried and true. When boys at school, this friend had saved his life. When young men at college, it was to this friend's continued help he owed any little success he may have attained. After leaving college, his position was secured through the kindly offices of this same friend, whose desk was next his own in the office in which they were employed. His gaze still rested on the vacant chair, but he saw only a pretty little suburban cottage, with flower garden and smooth green lawn and box–bordered gravel paths. Once upon a time that cottage was his, and the sweet–faced girl who trod those paths so daintily, tripping to the gate to meet him on his return in the evening, was his wife. Upstairs in the nursery their children slept. Two fair little girls, with their mother's pretty eyes and dainty ways. All that had been his once upon a time. He still watched that vacant chair, but he saw only the day they discovered the loss of that money, which had disappeared so mysteriously from the firm's safe. Suspicion rested upon that one true friend of his, the friend to whom he owed all he was, all he had. There was not sufficient evidence to prove that he was the thief, but in the minds of his employers there was no doubt as to his guilt. The supposed delinquent was dismissed, and the cloud of suspicion rested upon him wherever he went thereafter. Only two people had known the truth, the man now sitting by the stove in the tenement–house kitchen, and the friend who had suffered in silence rather than betray him. They had never met again, and not long after the robbery, the man now sitting by the stove had heard of his friend's death. The physician said it was typhoid, but he knew better. Disappointment, anxiety, heartbreak were the real causes of his friend's early taking off. He still gazed at the empty chair, but he saw only the series of misfortunes that had befallen him since the day his friend died. He had launched into business on his own account. The result was dire disaster. His home was burned in the dead of night. They barely escaped with their lives. Everything was gone. There was no insurance, and ruin and despair confronted them. His children died suddenly of a malignant fever, and the heart–broken mother had followed them to the grave within a few weeks. He was alone, all alone, and from that day to this had gone steadily downward, until now he found himself in this dirty tenement, depending for his daily bread upon the faded, ragged little woman who was now his wife. Poor Maggie! How she irritated him at times, and yet she had been a good, faithful wife to him. But for her, They would not have even this miserable apology for a home. Yes, even Maggie, with her watery eyes and thin, unkempt hair, Maggie who scrubbed floors for a living, and could not write so much as her own name, nor read the simplest child's primer, even Maggie was far too good for the worn-out drunkard and gambler whom she tended so faithfully. A light tap upon the door, but the man by the stove was too much occupied with those phantoms of the past to pay heed to it. The door opened quietly, and a priest stepped into the room. The man's gaze shifted from the vacant chair to the black-robed figure standing by the door, and looking at him in puzzled amazement. Phantoms of the past? Yes, indeed, and there was one more come to torment him and to mock him. The two watched each other in silence for a moment. Then the man crouching in his chair by the fire found voice at last. "What brings you here, you of all men? Have you come to taunt me, to upbraid me, to delight your eyes with the sight of my misery? Have you come to laugh at me in my downfall?" "Nay, friend," returned the priest gently, "none of those things has brought me to you to–day. I come only on a mission of mercy, to bring you peace and pardon." "But how did you find me? Who sent you to me?" demanded the man by the fire. "A little old woman, Nancy by name, told me there was one here sadly in need of the ministrations of a priest. I did not dream that I should find you." "You know me, then? You remember me?" "I remember you perfectly, and recognized you at once, though you have changed almost beyond recognition." "You say you know me, but you do not. You do not. You may know who I am, but you don't know what I am. You don't know that I'm a thief. Yes, a thief, for it was I who took that money he was accused of stealing. Do you know that?" "I know it," answered the priest calmly, "and still I say I bring you peace and pardon." "Perhaps you know, too, that I am a murderer, for it was grief, heartbreak, which weakened him so that when disease attacked him he had not sufficient strength to combat the fever. Do you know that, you who talk to me so easily of peace and pardon?" "I know that too, and it is in his name that I offer you forgiveness for your sins." "You know all, then? He told you?" "He told me in the delirium of fever. He never knew he told. He died thinking he carried the secret with him to the grave. He was faithful even unto death." "Faithful even unto death, and you, his brother, come to me now, and, knowing all, dare to hold out to me the hope of forgiveness and of peace?" The man stared incredulously into the kind, pitying eyes bent upon him. "I, his brother, offer you now forgiveness of all your sins and peace which surpasseth all understanding." The sick man was seized with a violent fit of coughing, and when it had passed he lay back in his chair exhausted, with closed eyes and white pain–drawn face. The priest, wishing to give him a moment to rest and recover his breath, walked to the window and looked out. In the field below more than a score of ragged men, women, and children were scratching and digging among piles of ashes, eagerly searching for and gathering up the half–burned cinders; searching, too, in the forlorn hope of finding something of greater value that might have been thrown away by accident. The rain beat noisily on the window–pane, and the priest shivered as he looked at those scantily clad little children, not one of whom could boast of shoes and stockings, and at the white heads and bent figures of old women, on whose unprotected shoulders the rain fell so pitilessly. What mattered the inclemency of the weather to them? Winter would be here by and by. They must gather in all the fuel possible before it was upon them with its snow and sleet and icy blasts. In fact, even when winter came, many of these same little children and old women, even grown men who could not find other work to do, or did not care to seek it, many of these same people would be seen day after day, scratching and digging in this same field of ashes. The priest turned from the window with a sigh of pity for the miserable creatures below. His glance strayed over the untidy kitchen, which bore all the marks of the most extreme poverty, and he gave another sigh of pity for the man who had been brought so low in the last days of his life, the man whom he had known in the time of his success and prosperity. He approached the chair beside the stove, and the tired eyes opened slowly and looked at him. Unaccustomed tears filled those eyes, and the hard voice softened marvellously. "Nancy was right," that changed voice was saying. "I am dying. Father, you say you bring me forgiveness in His name, forgiveness for the great wrong I did Him. In His name I will accept the gift. Father, I will confess my sins to you, and beg God's pardon for them." 2 hours later, when poor tired Maggie, with aching arms and aching back, returned from her day's work, she was surprised at the gentleness with which he greeted her. Never had he been so kind before. She was much more accustomed to harsh words, and even curses, than kindness from him. She set about preparing their evening meal, and he actually ate what she put in front of him without even once finding fault with the food or with her. She could not understand it, and felt vaguely alarmed. Again the door opened, and a face peered in anxiously. It would look as if the owner of the face was fully prepared to slam the door and take to her heels at a second's notice. The man in the chair by the stove smiled faintly, and called, "Come in, Nancy, it's all right." The little stooped figure sidled into the room, but stood with her hand upon the door, ready for flight at any moment. She could not trust her eyes and ears. She knew they must be deceiving her. "Come in, Nancy," the man repeated. "Come in and sat down there, in the chair you occupied this afternoon when you dared to tell me the truth that all others feared to tell. You're a brave little woman, Nancy, and, thanks to you, all is well with me at last. As He said, He brought me forgiveness for my sins, and peace which surpasseth all understanding. Thanks to you, Nancy, thanks to you." "Thanks to me, is it, lad? Not a bit of it, not a bit of it. Thanks be to God!" ejaculated Nancy fervently. "Thanks be to God!" whispered Maggie, as a tear rolled down her worn and faded cheek, and splashed into the pan of water in which she was washing the supper dishes. "Thanks be to God for bringing him back even at the 11th hour." End of The 11th Hour, from The Alchemist's Secret, by Isabel Cecilia Williams. Read by Lynn Thompson.
A narrative of the formation and services, 11th Massachusetts Volunteers, from April 15, 1861, to July 14, 1865, by Gustavus B. Hutchinson. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 11th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A narrative of the formation and services, 11th Massachusetts Volunteers, from April 15, 1861, to July 14, 1865, by Gustavus B. Hutchinson. A brief account of their experiences in the camp and in the field, to which is added a roster containing the names of all surviving members known to the Veterans Association, compiled from such authentic sources of information as were available, and from the personal recollections of the participants. Published by Gustavus B. Hutchinson, late Sergeant Company D, 11th Massachusetts Volunteers, Boston, Mass. Preface. Our little volume, though not pretentious, has outgrown its original limits. The intention of the compiler was not to attempt to write a historic narrative of the 4 years' service in the field of the grand old 11th, but simply to place in the hands of the surviving members and their friends a brief sketch of its birth, organization, muster in, and its arrival at the front, thus connecting with Captain Henry G. Blake's 3 years in the Army of the Potomac, with a few notes of such changes as occurred in our commanding officers, a list of the battles in which the regiment participated, and as correct a list of the surviving members as could be obtained from the roll of our present Veterans Association roll book, with a reference to the time and place of holding our annual reunions, together with the names of the officers who served on each of those occasions. It is at the request of very many members of the association and their friends that I have undertaken to supplement this with a light sketch of the service of the regiment in the field, including, with the 3 years' service of the original members, an addendum covering the service of those who re-enlisted, with such officers as were retained and remained in the field after June 12, 1864, including the recruits who joined the regiment in the last few months prior to the return of the old 3 years men, 45 enlisted men transferred from the 1st Massachusetts Volunteers, 196 officers and men transferred from the 16th Massachusetts Volunteers, and Captain Bennett's company of 91 officers and men who maintained the regimental organization in the field from June 12, 1864 to July 14, 1865. As to the measure of my success, I leave criticism to the participants, contenting myself with the reflection that I have striven to be faithful and just. My intention has been to place no statement in this book that could not be substantially verified, but if unintentional error or injustice should be discovered, I shall be glad to retract or amend it. My main object has been, after waiting 25 years for someone else to perform the labor, to place in cold type such facts as could be collected, particularly since the close of the war, as would fully establish the claim that Company D of the old 11th was the first company of Massachusetts volunteers raised for the war after the fall of Fort Sumter, that it was the nucleus of the glorious 11th, which was the first regiment raised, organized, and officered after the President's call. It seemed to me a duty that the record of the 4 years and 1 month's service of this gallant regiment, its hundreds of skirmishes, its active participation in the sieges of Yorktown and Petersburg, in its 25 battles of official record, where it carried Old Glory and the coat of arms of our grand old state into the thickest of the contest, should be made transmissible to those who were interested in the history of this regiment, second to none in the value of its service. With material which would readily cover 500 printed pages, my chief difficulty has been to so condense my narrative as to cover all essential points in these stirring events. I am much indebted to Captain Henry G. Blake, 3 years in the Army of the Potomac, Martin L. Haynes, History of the Old 2nd New Hampshire Volunteers, to the reports of the Adjutant General of this State, to the files of the Boston Daily Papers, 1861-65, to the diaries of comrades who have kindly loaned them to me, to official orders and letters, to which have been added the personal recollections and recitals of many comrades, most of the latter being fully corroborated by existent records. To the brave officers and men of the regiment, to the kind friends who have aided and assisted it from 1861 to the present day, and to the families of our comrades, this little volume is lovingly and fraternally dedicated. Gustavus B. Hutchinson, late Sergeant, Company D, 11th Massachusetts Volunteers. Contents. Chapter 1, Call to Arms and the Response. Chapter 2, The March and First Battle of Bull Run. Chapter 3, Bladensburg to Yorktown. Chapter 4, The Siege of Yorktown. Chapter 5, The Battle of Williamsburg. Chapter 6, On the March, Fair Oaks, Savage's Station, Glendale, Malvern Hill, and Harrison's Landing. Chapter 7, Bristow Station, Second Bull Run, Centreville, Chantilly, and Alexandria. Chapter 8, Falmouth, Fredericksburg, and the Battle of Chancellorsville. Chapter 9. The March to Gettysburg and the Battle. Chapter 10. The Pursuit of Lee and Brandy Station. Chapter 11. The Battle of the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor, and the Return of the 3 Years' Men. Chapter 12. Cold Harbor to Petersburg. Chapter 13. Petersburg to Lee's surrender. Chapter 14. The Return and a Resume. Chapter 15. Veteran Association and the Roster. End of Preface and Contents of A Narrative of the Formation and Services, 11th Massachusetts Volunteers, from April 15, 1861 to July 14, 1865, by Gustavus B. Hutchinson. Read by Mary in Arkansas.
11 Söhne by Franz Kafka. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 11th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ich habe 11 Söhne. Der erste ist äußerlich sehr unansehnlich, aber ernsthaft und klug. Trotzdem schätze ich ihn, wiewohl ich ihn als Kind wie alle anderen liebe, nicht sehr hoch ein. Sein Denken scheint mir zu einfach. Er sieht nicht rechts noch links und nicht in die Weite. In seinem kleinen Gedankenkreis läuft er immerfort rundum oder dreht sich vielmehr. Der zweite ist schön, schlank, wohlgebaut. Es entzückt ihn, in Fechterstellung zu sehen. Auch er ist klug, aber überdies welterfahren. Er hat viel gesehen, und deshalb scheint selbst die heimische Natur vertrauter mit ihm zu sprechen als mit den Daheimgebliebenen. Doch ist gewiß dieser Vorzug nicht nur und nicht einmal wesentlich dem Reisen zu verdanken. Er gehört vielmehr zu dem Unnachahmlichen dieses Kindes, das zum Beispiel von jedem anerkannt wird, der etwa seinen vielfach sich überschlagenden und doch geradezu wild beherrschten Kunstsprung ins Wasser ihm nachmachen will. Bis zum Ende des Sprungbrettes reicht der Mut und die Lust. Dort aber, statt zu springen, setzt sich plötzlich der Nachahmer und hebt entschuldigend die Arme. Und trotzdem allen, ich sollte doch eigentlich glückselig sein über ein solches Kind, ist mein Verhältnis zu ihm nicht ungetrübt. Sein linkes Auge ist ein wenig kleiner als das rechte und zwinkert viel. Ein kleiner Fehler nur, gewiß, der sein Gesicht sogar noch verwegener macht, als es sonst gewesen wäre, und niemand wird gegenüber der unnahbaren Abgeschlossenheit seines Wesens dieses kleinere, zwinkernde Auge tadelnd bemerken. Ich, der Vater, tue es. Es ist natürlich nicht dieser körperliche Fehler, der mir weh tut, sondern eine ihm irgendwie entsprechende, kleine Unregelmäßigkeit seines Geistes, irgendein in seinem Blut irrendes Gift, irgendeine Unfähigkeit, die mir allein sichtbare Anlage seines Lebens rund zu vollenden. Gerade dies macht ihn allerdings andererseits wieder zu meinem wahren Sohn, denn dieser, sein Fehler, ist gleichzeitig der Fehler unserer ganzen Familie und an diesem Sohn nur überdeutlich. Der dritte Sohn ist gleichfalls schön, aber es ist nicht die Schönheit, die mir gefällt. Es ist die Schönheit des Sängers, der geschwungene Mund, das träumerische Auge, der Kopf, der eine Draperie hinter sich benötigt, um zu wirken, die unmäßig sich wölbende Brust, die leicht auffahrenden und viel zu leicht sinkenden Hände, die Beine, die sich zieren, weil sie nicht tragen können, und überdies, der Ton seiner Stimme ist nicht voll, trügt einen Augenblick, lässt den Kenner aufhorchen, veratmet aber kurz darauf. Trotzdem im Allgemeinen alles verlockt, diesen Sohn zur Schau zu stellen, halte ich ihn doch am liebsten im Verborgenen. Er selbst drängt sich nicht auf, aber nicht etwa deshalb, weil er seine Mängel kennt, sondern aus Unschuld. Auch fühlt er sich fremd in unserer Zeit, als gehöre zwar zu meiner Familie, aber überdies doch zu einer andern, ihm für immer verlorenen, ist er oft unlustig und nichts kann ihn aufheitern. Mein 4. Sohn ist vielleicht der umgänglichste von allen. Ein wahres Kind seiner Zeit, ist er jedermann verständlich. Er steht auf dem allen gemeinsamen Boden, und jeder ist versucht, ihm zuzunicken. Vielleicht durch diese allgemeine Anerkennung gewinnt sein Wesen etwas Leichtes, seine Bewegungen etwas Freies, seine Urteile etwas Unbekümmertes. Manche seiner Aussprüche möchte man oft wiederholen, allerdings nur manche, denn in seiner Gesamtheit krankt er doch wieder an allzu großer Leichtigkeit. Er ist wie einer, der bewundernswert abspringt, schwalbengleich die Luft teilt, dann aber doch trostlos im öden Staube endet, ein Nichts. Solche Gedanken vergällen mir den Anblick dieses Kindes. Der 5. Sohn ist lieb und gut, versprach viel weniger, als er hielt, war so unbedeutend, dass man sich förmlich in seiner Gegenwart allein fühlte, hat es aber doch zu einigem Ansehen gebracht. Fragte man mich, wie das geschehen ist, so könnte ich kaum antworten. Unschuld dringt vielleicht doch noch am leichtesten durch das Toben der Elemente in dieser Welt, und unschuldig ist er. Vielleicht allzu unschuldig. Freundlich zu jedermann, vielleicht allzu freundlich. Ich gestehe, mir wird nicht wohl, wenn man ihn mir gegenüber lobt. Es heißt doch, sich das Leben etwas zu leicht zu machen, wenn man einen so offensichtlich lobenswürdigen lobt, wie es mein Sohn ist. Mein 6. Sohn scheint, wenigstens auf den ersten Blick, der tiefsinnigste von allen, ein Kopfhänger und doch ein Schwätzer. Deshalb kommt man ihm nicht leicht bei. Ist er am Unterliegen, so verfällt er in unbesiegbare Traurigkeit. Erlangt er das Übergewicht, so wahrt er es durch Schwätzen. Doch spreche ich ihm eine gewisse selbstvergessene Leidenschaft nicht ab. Bei hellem Tag kämpft er sich oft durch das Denken wie im Traum. Ohne krank zu sein, vielmehr hat er eine sehr gute Gesundheit, taumelt er manchmal, besonders in der Dämmerung, braucht aber keine Hilfe, fällt nicht. Vielleicht hat an dieser Erscheinung seine körperliche Entwicklung Schuld. Er ist viel zu groß für sein Alter. Das macht ihn unschön im Ganzen, trotz auffallend schöner Einzelheiten, zum Beispiel der Hände und Füße. Unschön ist übrigens auch seine Stirn, sowohl in der Haut als in der Knochenbildung irgendwie verschrumpft. Der 7. Sohn gehört mir vielleicht mehr als alle anderen. Die Welt versteht ihn nicht zu würdigen. Seine besondere Art von Witz versteht sie nicht. Ich überschätze ihn nicht. Ich weiß, er ist geringfügig genug. Hätte die Welt keinen anderen Fehler als den, dass sie ihn nicht zu würdigen weiß, sie wäre noch immer makellos. Aber innerhalb der Familie wollte ich diesen Sohn nicht missen. Sowohl Unruhe bringt er, als auch Ehrfurcht vor der Überlieferung. Und beides fügt er, wenigstens für mein Gefühl, zu einem unanfechtbaren Ganzen. Mit diesem Ganzen weiß er allerdings selbst am wenigsten etwas anzufangen. Das Rad der Zukunft wird er nicht ins Rollen bringen, aber diese seine Anlage ist so aufmunternd, so hoffnungsreich. Ich wollte, er hätte Kinder und diese wieder Kinder. Leider scheint sich dieser Wunsch nicht erfüllen zu wollen. In einer mir zwar begreiflichen, aber ebenso unerwünschten Selbstzufriedenheit, die allerdings in großartigem Gegensatz zum Urteil seiner Umgebung steht, treibt er sich allein umher, kümmert sich nicht um Mädchen und wird trotzdem niemals seine gute Laune verlieren. Mein 8. Sohn ist mein Schmerzenskind, und ich weiß eigentlich keinen Grund dafür. Er sieht mich fremd an, und ich fühle mich doch väterlich eng mit ihm verbunden. Die Zeit hat vieles gut gemacht, früher aber befiel mich manchmal ein Zittern, wenn ich nur an ihn dachte. Er geht seinen eigenen Weg, hat alle Verbindungen mit mir abgebrochen und wird gewiß mit seinem harten Schädel, seinem kleinen athletischen Körper, nur die Beine hatte er als Junge recht schwach, aber das mag sich inzwischen schon ausgeglichen haben, überall durchkommen, wo es ihm beliebt. Öfters hatte ich Lust, ihn zurückzurufen, ihn zu fragen, wie es eigentlich um ihn steht, warum er sich vom Vater so abschließt und was er im Grunde beabsichtigt. Aber nun ist er so weit und so viel Zeit ist schon vergangen, nun mag es so bleiben, wie es ist. Ich höre, dass er als der einzige meiner Söhne einen Vollbart trägt. Schön ist das bei einem so kleinen Mann natürlich nicht. Mein 9. Sohn ist sehr elegant und hat den für Frauen bestimmten, süßen Blick. So süß, dass er bei Gelegenheit sogar mich verführen kann, der ich doch weiß, dass förmlich ein nasser Schwamm genügt, um allen diesen überirdischen Glanz wegzuwischen. Das Besondere an diesem Jungen aber ist, dass er gar nicht auf Verführung ausgeht. Ihm würde es genügen, sein Leben lang auf dem Kanapee zu liegen und seinen Blick an die Zimmerdecke zu verschwenden oder, noch viel lieber, ihn unter den Augenlidern ruhen zu lassen. Ist er in dieser von ihm bevorzugten Lage, dann spricht er gern und nicht übel, gedrängt und anschaulich, aber doch nur in engen Grenzen. Geht er über sie hinaus, was sich bei ihrer Enge nicht vermeiden lässt, wird sein Reden ganz leer. Man würde ihm abwinken, wenn man Hoffnung hätte, dass dieser mit Schlaf gefüllte Blick es bemerken könnte. Mein 10. Sohn gilt als unaufrichtiger Charakter. Ich will diesen Fehler nicht ganz in Abrede stellen, nicht ganz bestätigen. Sicher ist, dass wer ihn in der weit über sein Alter hinausgehenden Feierlichkeit herankommen sieht, im immer festgeschlossenen Gehrock, im alten, aber übersorgfältig geputzten schwarzen Hut, mit dem unbewegten Gesicht, dem etwas vorragenden Kinn, den schwer über die Augen sich wölbenden Lidern, den manchmal an den Mund geführten 2 Fingern. Wer ihn so sieht, denkt, das ist ein grenzenloser Heuchler. Aber nun höre man ihn reden, verständig, mit Bedacht, kurz angebunden, mit boshafter Lebendigkeit Fragen durchkreuzend, in erstaunlicher, selbstverständlicher und froher Übereinstimmung mit dem Weltganzen. Eine Übereinstimmung, die notwendigerweise den Hals strafft und den Kopf erheben lässt. Viele, die sich sehr klug dünken und die sich, aus diesem Grunde, wie sie meinten, von seinem Äußern abgestoßen fühlten, hat er durch sein Wort stark angezogen. Nun gibt es aber wieder Leute, die sein Äußeres gleichgültig lässt, denen aber sein Wort heuchlerisch erscheint. Ich, als Vater, will hier nicht entscheiden, doch muß ich eingestehen, dass die letzteren Beurteiler jedenfalls beachtenswerter sind als die ersteren. Mein 11. Sohn ist zart, wohl der schwächste unter meinen Söhnen, aber täuschend in seiner Schwäche. Er kann nämlich zu Zeiten kräftig und bestimmt sein, doch ist allerdings selbst dann die Schwäche irgendwie grundlegend. Es ist aber keine beschämende Schwäche, sondern etwas, das nur auf diesem unseren Erdboden als Schwäche erscheint. Ist nicht zum Beispiel auch Flugbereitschaft Schwäche, da sie doch Schwanken und Unbestimmtheit und Flattern ist? Etwas derartiges zeigt mein Sohn. Den Vater freuen natürlich solche Eigenschaften nicht. Sie gehen ja offenbar auf Zerstörung der Familie aus. Manchmal blickt er mich an, als wollte er mir sagen, ich werde dich mitnehmen, Vater. Dann denke ich, du wärst der Letzte, dem ich mich vertraue. Und sein Blick scheint wieder zu sagen, mag ich also wenigstens der Letzte sein? Das sind die 11 Söhne. End of 11 Söhne bei Franz Kafka. Read by Julia Niedermeyer.
Judicium Astrologicum pro anno 1811, from Vox Dolarum, or a Loyal Almanac for the year of Human Redemption, 1811, by Francis Moore. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 11th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Vox solorium, vox Dei. The voice of the heavens is the voice of God. He speaks in all the changes of the seasons and of the times. Courteous reader, I wish you to observe the events and signs of these times, for indeed they are very serious, and we should do well to take heed thereunto. For as a nation we are all deeply interested in what is passing on the continent of Europe and other parts of the world. For indeed half the world seems in motion, and threatens to alter or overturn the whole current of human affairs, both in a civil and ecclesiastical sense. There has already been struck a final blow to the papal power, as liberty of conscience and the Protestant faith are now more extended than ever. This was not the case heretofore in papish countries. The marriage of the French Emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte, with a daughter of the House of Austria, Her Royal Highness Maria Louisa, will be found an event of very great political consequence both to us and to all Europe. Austria will gain more by this and negotiating than ever could or would have been done by the sword. By fighting, that illustrious house was fast falling to decay, but by this circumstance will begin again to rise. The Emperor of Austria could never gain by waging war against France what will now be obtained by this union. Such is the vicissitude of events. My readers may recollect that I did long ago, from stellary configurations and the cabalistical art, infer that divine providence had ordained some certain kingdoms and countries to great tribulations, if not an utter destruction or new modification of their constitutions, etc. This has been but too truly fulfilled in some countries, and is still, I fear, fulfilling in others. What reverses of fortune, and what a waste of life have late years produced! What a bloody and eventful war are we still engaged in! How wide has been its progress, and still how dark with respect to its termination! May God protect my native land and country from civil commotions, and all other calamities, both now and for evermore. I now present my readers with another hieroglyphic alluding to these eventful times. I shall omit the deciphering of these characters, as I sometimes have done, but leave them to time and the curious to construe. They relate to a view of mundane transactions. Before I finish this part of my almanac, I wish to remind my readers of what I believe to be a great truth, and that is, that God will in due time reform and purge his church. Before that is brought about, a great scourge shall be brought on Italy, that is, Popish Rome, and that for the depravation and corruption of the clergy, and the evil government of corrupt prelates, who will not themselves enter into the kingdom of heaven, nor suffer those that would. Those in tribulation shall cry to the Almighty from the earth, and their cries shall be heard. And it is also my opinion, drawn from political and other observations, that we are near the dawning of some important change, or at least of something very important, which the sacred hand of Providence at present withholds from us, for there will be a time of great alterations in all nations, as is mentioned in the 12th chapter of the prophet Daniel. End of Judicium Astrologicum pro anno 1811. Read by Amy Graymore. Holton, Maine.
Las faldas pantalón, de la tarde, diario independiente de noticias y avisos del 23 de febrero de 1911. Esta es una grabación de LibriVox que forma parte de su 11º aniversario. Todas las grabaciones de LibriVox están en el dominio público. Para más información o para participar como voluntario, por favor visite LibriVox.org. La nueva moda sigue haciendo en Madrid heroínas. Esta tarde 2 mujeres elegantísimas pasearon por las calles de Atocha y Concepción Jerónima llevando la moderna falda pantalón. Un gentío inmenso las siguió dando prueba de su incultura y barbarie. Fueron silbadas y apostrofadas produciéndose fenomenal escándalo. Algunos individuos más osados y peor educados se abalanzaron a las 2 mujeres, intentando desgarrarlas la falda entre los gritos de la multitud, que no salió en defensa de las damas. Estas se vieron obligadas a refugiarse en un portal, estacionándose junto al mismo millares de personas que impidieron por largo tiempo la circulación de tranvías. Mientras se producían estos incidentes, en la calle se armó viva discusión entre los partidarios y los enemigos de la nueva moda, repartiéndose algunas bofetadas, supremo argumento a que se apeló para dar fuerza a la tesis sustentada. Mientras esto ocurría, Del mismo portal donde se habían refugiado las dos señoritas, salieron otras dos vistiendo falda en trobé muy pronunciada, y creyéndose el público que usaban falda pantalón, se armó fenomenal gritería, persiguiéndolas el público en medio de denuestos e imprecaciones, obligándolas a refugiarse en una casa contigua. Los guardias disolvieron la manifestación. Entonces salieron las que llevaban falda pantalón dirigiéndose hacia la Puerta del Sol, produciéndose nueva rechifla. Los guardias las refugiaron en el Ministerio de la Gobernación. Fin de las faldas pantalón. De la tarde, diario independiente de noticias y avisos del 23 de febrero de 1911. Leído por Luis Alberto Martín.
The Lodger in Number 11 by Kate Jordan. This is a LibriVox recording read in honor of the 11th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Miss Pickwick lived in a garret in a decayed mansion which stood at the corner of Upper Bleecker Street and one of the queer little byways with a forgotten name running across that dingy New York thoroughfare. It was springtime. The dormer windows were open, and on each window-sill stood a small flower-pot, the sturdy blossoms making a bit of colour that was very effective beside the gauzy curtains of cheesecloth. An old mahogany dresser, to which Miss Pickwick had clung most tenaciously, even when she was hungry, stood in a corner, polished so beautifully by her own delicate hands that it shone like a dusky mirror. There were a few old blue plates, too, saved from the wreckage of her affluence. As for Miss Pickwick herself, she was in harmony with the refinement and cosiness of her garret room. Her collars and cuffs were of her own embroidering, and her best silk gown, turned so many times that it was now of a colour not in the calendar, fitted her spare graceful figure with a smoothness that told of long acquaintance with every line. She had a smile that old people and children warmed to, and a voice, a touch of hand, that made homeless cats and dogs adopt her as their own as soon as they came within the radius of either. Nevertheless, this gentle Miss Pickwick, who made scarfs or did fine sewing for a living, who painted china when anyone wanted it, and had been known to make over old hats at very low prices, thought herself quite a cynic. She thought all men fickle and faithless, except her young cousin Ralph. She thought all actresses wicked. She had known only one. The reason for these fixed antipathies tells her story. Years before, how many, many years before, she had lived in this very house where now she rented a garret. Then it had been the mansion of her father, a prosperous lawyer, and she had been his petted daughter. In this house she had loved. In this house she had first known what it was to taste the cup of pain. No one remembered the story now, except Miss Pickwick. David Townsend was the name written across a carte de visite photograph at the bottom of a cedar box which an uncle of Miss Pickwick's had brought years ago from Palestine. The picture showed a handsome, reckless type of the ultra-fashionable young man of the late 60s. The face had poetry and fire in it. The very pose of the head was impulsive. He seemed a man who would make bitter mistakes and eat the kernel of despair in unavailable regret for them. This is just what David Townsend did, no doubt, when he jilted pretty Rosanna Pickwick for Mademoiselle Delphine, the dancer at the Bowery Theatre, who walked on the hearts of the young men of that day. You will understand now why Miss Pickwick hated the words actress and theatre. She stopped sewing when a barrel organ paused under her window and began churning out "Her bright smile haunts me still." The old, old song that so many girls had sung to their sweethearts in the long ago seemed to speak in reawakened tenderness to the old house, and also to Miss Pickwick's heart. She had carolled that old song to David Townsend many a time, his eyes glowing as he listened. It is years since last we met, we may never meet again. I have struggled to forget, but the struggle was in vain. Never meet again, her thoughts ran. Never indeed. The needle fell unheeded to the floor as she began to think of the second chapter of her life story. The dark chapter after the blow fell, when she had to bear the stigma of jilted. She had carried her head high, though her heart seemed no longer to beat under its load of pain. Her cold, proud face was a defiance to the curious, pitying eyes of her friends. By degrees, when people had dared speak David's name to her, she heard he had circulated a story that she had dismissed him. She remembered now that she had thought him merciful, though weak and false, and she had not contradicted the rumour. She picked up the needle and went on with her task. If he is living, I suppose he is still in Paris. Wasn't it in 77 that Abby Sheldon ran across him on the stairs of the Grand Opera? Yes, he was living there then. Then it was 84 when Mary Fitzwilliam wrote to me from Rome, saying he was living in a pension there, his wife dead, most of his money gone. Ah, he's probably dead by this time. She stitched diligently. I wonder if he was happy. I wonder if he ever regretted. And her thoughts trailed away into thin imaginings. There was a hurried little tip-tap at the door. It was Ralph's individual knock, so that she would not hesitate to admit him. The same timidity that always made her look under her bed at night, although it was scarcely 10 inches from the floor and could be the hiding-place of only the most attenuated marauder, made her keep her door locked constantly. I stay here because of old association, Miss Pickwick had explained at times, but some of the lodgers seem to be doubtful people, and tipplers. She hurried over and turned the key, her face very happy. She loved Ralph, his youth, his handsome face, his talent, his ambition to be a great sculptor. "Why, Ralph," she said as she shook his hand, drawing him in, "I didn't expect a visit to-day. This is a pleasant surprise to your old cousin." "I was down after an Italian model. Thought I'd look in," said Ralph, with a touch of confusion as he sat down. "Can you have a bite of lunch with me, dear?" "Of course. Tea and toast. I'll be delighted." When the little table was set, Miss Pickwick became suddenly aware of a surprising thing which she had failed to notice in her hurry. "Why, Ralph!" she exclaimed, "have not you on your best grey suit, and a white flower in your buttonhole? What does it mean?" "Why, it means, Cousin Rosie, that besides hunting for a model, I've been calling on a young lady who lives in this very house." "Whom can you possibly know here, Ralph?" And she stared at him. "Don't you know the people in number 11, first floor?" he asked. "I make no acquaintances among the lodgers here. They are mostly foreigners." From Miss Pickwick's untravelled, ultra-Puritan standpoint, foreign birth was eminently undesirable. "Foreigners?" Ralph laughed. "Why, Auntie, you've no idea what nice people live in other countries. Now, this girl, Eugénie, is French." Miss Pickwick thought of Mademoiselle Delphine and her very educated toes. "Have nothing to do with her, my dear Ralph," she said, setting her mouth primly. "French women are butterflies." she's a peach," said Ralph tenderly and with boyish warmth. "A what?" "Well, I mean, she's just right. Her eyes are just like amethysts. I never saw such eyes." Miss Pickwick leaned forward and transfixed him with as stern a look as she was capable of. "What about her character?" she demanded. "She has character to burn." "Is that slang?" Miss Pickwick asked helplessly. "I don't understand." "Yes, I suppose it is, and not very elegant. But I mean she has heaps of character. Why, do you know, after singing her little part every night in an opera, she comes home and nurses her sick father. And in the daytime she makes straw hats." Ralph delivered the last words with an air which seemed to count out any further contradiction. "If that isn't character, if it isn't sweetness, if it isn't courage, if it isn't being a brick, then show me what is. I tell you, Eugénie is adorable. She's a witch, a saint, as merry as a kitten, as wise as a philosopher, and she has the miserable fate to love me." He knew that this would create consternation, and it did, but not the sort Ralph had expected. To his amaze, she sat back quietly, a pallor almost bluish stealing over the sweet, patient face. "A Frenchwoman, an actress," she said, in a voice scarcely above a whisper, and then she looked past Ralph into the distance, into years of which he could know nothing. "What's the matter?" he asked, springing up and taking her hands, which were closed and cold. "It seems strange that you should have chosen this girl of all others, because "Well, tell me, Cousin Rosie. You look so strange. You've never even seen Eugénie, I'm sure." "I'm not thinking of her," she said, holding his hands fast and letting her grey eyes look deep down into his heart. "I'm thinking of the ruin a woman made of my life, a Frenchwoman, an actress." "Why, Cousin Rosie—" "You never heard my story, Ralph. Everyone belonging to both of us is gone, and my embittered heart, my useless life, were important failures only to myself. But you see, dear, why I feel almost an uncanny terror of this girl you love. She is not the one I would have chosen for you. Is she worthy of you? Will she make your life happy? How can she, a foreigner, a girl of the theatre, help or understand you in your career?" Ralph was touched to the very core of his warm heart. He could have tried to overcome her objections with a jest and a laugh, had they been merely dislikes formed from her prim, narrow outlook. But this glimpse of the disillusioned self, which she had kept so long and so proudly hidden, awakened new thoughts. He drew his chair over to Miss Pickwick's and wheedled from her some of the facts of her love story. She had told him only a few things, her lover's name, the dancer's name, when a slow light of comprehension stole over Ralph's face. When the story was done, he looked at Miss Pickwick, an unwonted tenderness mixed with a strange excitement in his blue eyes. "You have never seen this David Townsend since he married?" "Never. He went to Paris to live. I remained here. No, indeed, that pain was spared me," said Miss Pickwick, rising with a sigh. "And now, dear, that you have listened to my old maid's love tale, you will know how the thought of any similarity between your wife and the woman who dazzled David Townsend and drew him away from me could only cause me pain." "Yes, I understand," said Ralph, and there was still that strange look of excitement in his eyes. "But believe me, dear Cousin Rosie, you misjudge my sweetheart. Wait until you see her. She earns her living by singing to support her father, because God has given her the gift of a beautiful voice. She's as pure as a violet. The theatre need not be a den of iniquity, Cousin Rosie. Believe me, young as I am, I've learned that you can find in a place just what you bring to it. Eugénie comes and goes upon her way as a singer, but in heart and at home she is just a simple girl, true, womanly, proud, and sweet." Miss Pickwick sat down, her hands folded primly. "I see you have made up your mind," she said with a little sigh. "You are your own master, of course. What favour do you want to ask of me?" "Well, it's just this," said Ralph slowly. "You have been asking me about Eugénie, and you're awfully afraid I'm making a mistake. Now her father is coming to you to make inquiries about me, because he's afraid Eugénie may be making a mistake." "Her father?" And Miss Pickwick gave a little shiver of distaste. "Yes." Ralph burst out into a peal of boyish laughter. "Oh, I suppose you see him in your mind's eye, a swarthy, mincing Frenchman of the most objectionable sort. Perhaps you think he wears earrings." Miss Pickwick passed her hand tremblingly over her face. "I speak so little French now." "He speaks English as well as you do." Ralph's tone was full of anticipation and mystery, although Miss Pickwick did not realise it. "Will you see him?" "When?" "Now." "Oh!" The unusualness of the coming episode flushed her cheek. "Very well," she added gently. "If you wish it, dear. But give me time to put away the lunch things and tidy up a bit." Ralph went to the door, and then he paused and looked at Miss Pickwick. She was frail, and no longer young. A great surprise might shock her spent heart dangerously, and he had a great surprise in store for her. Impulsively he went back to her side and put his strong, masterful arms around her, kissing her warmly. "See here, Cousin Rosie. Something wonderful is going to happen to you. Something wonderful. Now, don't ask any questions, but be prepared." He fled from the room before she could speak. Miss Pickwick remained standing where he had left her. She pondered over Ralph's last words, but without reaching their meaning. Then she brushed her soft blonde hair and fastened her embroidered collar with the cameo brooch worn only on special occasions. When a quiet but decided knock came upon her door, she gave a nervous start. A thrill ran through her whole system, opening her grey eyes with expectancy and making a rosy bloom leap to her wan cheek, so that, for a moment, she looked more like the Rosanna Pickwick of other days than she had done in years. It was well she did, for when her door opened, admitting a grey-haired man in well-fitting but worn clothes, she knew that the past had entered, that it was looking at her from under the visitor's brows with the dark, unquenchable, never-to-be-forgotten eyes of David Townsend. For a moment the two stood like ghosts come back and gazed at each other. A miracle had happened. It was the man who spoke first. "You are Ralph Morton's cousin?" "Yes, and you?" she faltered. "I'm Eugénie's father." He placed his hat on the table just in time to assist Miss Pickwick as she swayed in trying to reach a chair. As she rallied, their hands touched. "We meet again here," David was saying, "in the old house." "How long have you been here?" Miss Pickwick asked when she could. "Since before Christmas. 4 or 5 months. When I came back to New York with Eugénie, I wandered through this old neighbourhood, now so sadly changed. When I saw this, your old home rented out in rooms, I settled here with my daughter." He looked at her with sudden yearning. "Are you sorry? Do you want me to go away?" "I wonder why you came. This is a house I should have thought you'd try to forget," said Miss Picklewick, trying to be very stern. "But why should I wish to forget? All these years I've thought tenderly of you, in spite of the letter you sent casting me off to pay the price of my folly." "Cast you off? Folly?" Miss Pickering asked, sitting upright. "Surely you haven't forgotten," said David. "I confess I acted like a young fool and deserved to be dismissed. But now, in the twilight of our lives, I may tell you the truth. It was you I loved, Rosanna. I loved you then, and I love you still." As she listened in amaze, it seemed to Miss Picklewick that life had turned back many chapters. "When your letter came breaking the engagement," David continued. "Letter?" Miss Picklewick's lips tried to murmur in denial. "I think I went mad with grief. Then I wrote you, begging an interview. You wrote back a refusal. I thought I hated you then, and in my pain and wrath I married Delphine." Miss Picklewick was silent, but her memory was busy. She recalled how, 15 years before, her Aunt Betty, with whom she had lived then, had tried on her deathbed to tell her niece something about a letter. Now it was all clear. Aunt Betty, thinking David too inconstant and reckless to make a good husband, had sent those letters to keep Rosanna from what she thought would be a wretched marriage. Miss Picklewick pondered on the situation. Should she tell David the truth? No. Wise and feminine to the core, she determined to shield Aunt Betty. She sat perfectly quiet, dropped her lashes, a smile nicking the corners of her mouth. As David leaned nearer and kissed her hand with the grace that men have lost in these rushing modern days, her heart stirred under the caress like a bird in the spring. "Don't you think, Rosanna, that God has sent us to each other at last?" In the back parlour, with number 11 marked in white letters on the big mahogany door, the younger lovers waited for the return of Eugénie's father. "Oh, it is such a happy day," said Eugénie, her hand in Ralph's as they listened for his step. "You know, this morning there came news of a legacy to my papa from his great aunt, enough to buy us all a pretty house in the country. It is wonderful, wonderful that your cousin and he are old sweethearts. Wonderful about the money. Wonderful, most wonderful that you love me," Ralph added. The hours crept along until it was almost twilight, and still Eugénie's father had not come. "They have forgotten us," said Ralph. "They have so much to talk of. A whole lifetime since they've seen each other." "Let's creep upstairs," said Eugénie. And they did, hand in hand. But outside Miss Picklewick's door they paused. First they heard a woman's voice speaking very softly. "And do you remember, David, that day—" Then there came a murmur and a low, happy laugh that Ralph could hardly recognize as his elderly cousin's. Next a man's voice said, "And the night of the ball to the Grand Duke Alexis. You wore white, with such a lot of roses. Oh, dearest, don't you remember?" The boy and girl looked into each other's faces in a startled way, almost with awe, as they stole away more softly even than they had come. On the threshold of number 11 they paused, and Ralph took his sweetheart's face into the circle of his hands as he looked into her eyes. "Sweetheart, may we love so when we are old." End of The Lodger in Number 11 by Kate Jordan. Read by Ruth Golding.
Number 11, A Hospital Story. From A Book About Doctors by John Cordy Jefferson. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honour of the 11th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. "Then, sir," said Mrs. Mallet, "if you'll only not look so frightened, I'll tell you how it was. It is now 20 years ago that I was very unfortunate. I was not more than 30 years of age, but I was old enough to have just lost a good husband and a dear little babe, and then, when I hadn't a sixpence in my pocket, I caught the fever, and had to go to a hospital. I wasn't used to trouble, for although I was nothing better than a poor man's child, I had known all my life nothing but kindness. I never had but one mistress, my lady, who, when she was the most beautiful young lady in all Devonshire, took me out of a village school and raised me to be her maid, and her maid I was for 12 years, first down in Devonshire, and afterwards up in London, when she married, somewhat against the will of her family, a thorough good gentleman, but a poor one, who after a time took her out to India, where he became a judge and she a grand lady. My dear mistress would have taken me out to India with her, only she was then too poor to pay for my passage out, and bear the expense of me there where labour can be got so cheap, and native servants can live on a handful of rice a day. She, sir, is Lady Burridge, the same who gave me the money to start this house with, and whose carriage you saw yesterday at my door. So my mistress went eastward, and I was left behind to marry a young man I had loved for some few years, and who had served during that time as clerk to my lady's husband. I was a young woman, and young women, to the end of the chapter, will think it a brave thing to fall in love. I thought my sweetheart was a handsomer and cleverer man than any other of his station in all London. I wonder how many girls have thought the same of their favourites. I went to church one morning with a fluttering heart and trembling knees, and came out under the porch thinking that all my life would ever afterwards be brighter and lighter and sunnier than it had been before. Well, in dancing into that pretty blunder, I wasn't a bigger fool than lots of others. And if a good husband is a great blessing, and she must be a paltry woman who can say nay to that, I was born to luck, for my husband was kind, good, and true. His temper was as sweet at home as his manners were abroad. He was hard-working and clever, sober and devout, and, though you may laugh at a woman of my age talking so like a romance, I tell you, sir, that if my life had to come all over again, I'd rather have the mischance of marrying my dear Richard than the good fortune of wedding a luckier man. There's no doubt the game turned out ill for me. At first it seemed as if it would be just otherwise, for my husband had good health, plenty of work, and sufficient pay, so that, when my little girl came, her sweet face brought no shadow of anxiety with it, and we hoped she would be followed in due course by half a dozen more. But ere the dear babe had learned to prattle, a drear change came over the happy prospect. The fever crept over the gentle darling, and after she had suffered for a week or more, lying on my arms, God raised her from me into his happy home, where the beauty of summer reigns for ever, and the coldness of winter never enters. Richard and I took the body of our babe to the burial ground, and saw it covered up in the earth, which by turns gives all we get, and takes away from us all we have. And as we walked back to our deserted home arm in arm, in the light of the summer's evening, we talked to each other more solemnly and tenderly than we had done for many a day. And the next morning he went back to his work in the office from which he had absented himself since our child's death, and I encouraged him to cheer up, and not to give way to sorrow when I was not nigh to comfort him, but toil bravely and hopefully, as a man should. And in so advising him, I do not blush to say that I thought not only of what was best for his spirits, but also of what our necessity required, for we were only poor people, not at any time beforehand in the world, and now reduced by the cost of our little one's illness and funeral, and, sir, in this hard world we women, most times, have the best of it, for when the house is full of sorrow, we have little else to do but weep, but the men have to grieve and toil too. But poor Richard could not hold up his head. He came back from work that day pale and faint, and in the evening he had a chill and a heat fit that let me know the fever which had killed our little one had passed on to him. The next day he could not leave his bed, and the doctor, a most kind man who was always making rough jokes in a rough voice just to hide his womanliness, said to me, "If your husband goes down to his master's chambers in the Temple to-day, he had better stop at the coffin-maker's, in the corner of Chancery Lane, and leave his measure." But Richard's case was not one for a jest, and he rapidly became worse than the doctor fancied he would be when he made that light speech. He was ill for 6 weeks, and then began slowly to mend. He got on so far as to sit up for 2 days, for half an hour while he had his tea, and we were hoping that soon he would be able to be moved into the country, to his sister's, whose husband was an engineer at Stratford. But suddenly he had a relapse, and on the morning that finished the 10th week of his being seized, his arms let go their hold on my neck, and I was left alone. All during my babe's and Richard's long illness, my sister Martha had behaved like a true sister to me. She was my only sister, and, to the best of my knowledge, the only relation I had in the world. And a good one she was. From girl to woman, her heart always rung out clear like a bell. She had 3 young children, but even fear of contagion reaching them could not keep her from me in my trouble. She kept making the journey backwards and forwards at least once a week in the carrier's cart, and though she had no money to spare, she brought me with her husband's blessing presents of wine and jellies and delicate meat, to buy which, I knew right well, she and her husband and her children must have pinched themselves down to scanty rations of bread and water. Her hands helped mine to put the flowers in poor Richard's coffin. She bore me up while I followed it pale and trembling to the grave. And when that horrible day was coming to an end, and she was about to return home, she took me into her arms, and covering me with kisses and caressings and 1,000 gentle sayings, as if I had been a child of her own instead of her sister and a grown woman, she made me promise to come down to her at Stratford at the end of the week, and stay with her till God should give me strength and spirits and guidance to work for myself again. But that promise was not kept. Next morning the rough, tender doctor came in out of his mere goodness to give me a friendly look and a "God speed you," and found me too sickening for an illness. I knew, sir, he had made the discovery before his lips confessed a word, for when he had taken my wrist and felt my pulse, and looked up into my worn face, he turned pale, as if almost frightened, and such a look of grief came on his eyes and lips that he could not have said plainer, "My poor woman, my poor woman. What I feared from the beginning, and prayed God not to permit, has come to pass at last." Then I fairly broke down and cried bitterly, and I told the doctor how sore afflicted I was, how God had taken my husband and babe from me, how all my little means had been consumed in the expenses of nursing, how the little furniture in my rooms would not pay half of what I owed to honest folk, and how, even in my unspeakable wretchedness, I could not ask the Almighty to take away my life, for I could not rest in death if I left the world without paying my just debts. Well, sir, the doctor sat down by me and said, in his softest and simplest way, "Come, come, neighbour, don't you frighten yourself. Be calm and listen to me. Don't let the thoughts of debts worry you. What little I have done in the way of business for your poor child and husband I never wished to be paid for, so there's your greatest creditor disposed of. As for the others, they won't trouble you, for I'll undertake to see that none of them shall think that you have wronged them. I wish I could do more, neighbour, but I ain't a rich man, and I have got a wife and a regiment of little ones at home who won't help in the long run to make me richer, although I am sure they'll make me happier. But now for yourself. You must go to the fever hospital to have your illness out. The physician who'll take care of you there is the cleverest in all London, and, as he is an old friend of mine, I can ask him to pay especial attention to you. You'll find it a pleasant, cheerful place, much more cool and comfortable than your rooms here. The nurses are all of them good people, and while lying on your bed there, you won't have to fret yourself with thinking how you are to pay for the doctors and medicine and kitchen physic." I was only too thankful to assent to all the doctor said, and forthwith he fetched a coach, put me into it, and took me off to the fever hospital, to which his influence procured me instant admittance. Without delay I was conveyed to a large and comfortable bed, which, with another similar bed parallel to it, was placed against the wall at the end of a long gallery containing 20 other beds. The first day of my hospital life I spent tranquilly enough. The languor of extreme exhaustion had soothed me, and my malady had not robbed me of my senses. So I lay calmly on my couch and watched all the proceedings and arrangements of the great bedroom. I noticed how clean and white all the beds looked, and what kindly women the nurses were. I remarked what a wide space there was down the middle of the room between the 2 rows of beds, and again what large intervals there were between the beds on each side. I observed, too, that over every bed there was a ventilator set in the wall, and beneath the ventilator a board on which was pinned a paper bearing in a filled-up printed form the number of the bed to which it belonged, the date when the occupant was admitted to the ward, the names of the physician and nurse under whose charge she was, the medicine she was taking, and the diet on which she was put. It made me smile, moreover, to note how the nurses, when giving physic or nourishment, or otherwise attending to their charges, would frequently address them by the numbers on their boards instead of their names. "Nurse, dear," I asked with a smile when my attendant came near me, "what's my name?" "Oh, dear," said she, looking up at the board which had already been fixed over my head, "your name is number 11. It would be hard for me to give you, sir, any notion of how those words, number 11, took possession of my mind. This was the more strange because the nurse did not usually call me by them, for she was a motherly creature, and almost always addressed me as "poor dear," or "poor child," and the doctors who had the charge of me spoke to me as "friend," or "old friend," or "neighbour." But all the same for that, I always thought of myself as number 11, and ere many days, if anyone had asked me what my name was, I could not for the life of me have remembered Abigail Mallet, but should have answered number 11. The patient in the next bed to me was number 22. She was, like myself, a poor woman who had just lost a husband and child by the fever, and both of us were very much struck and then drawn to each other by discovering how we had suffered alike. We often interchanged a few words during the long, sorrowful hours of the long, hot nights, but our whisperings always turned to the same subject. "Number 11," I used to hear her poor thin lips murmur. "Are you thinking of your baby, dear?" "To be sure, darling," I would answer. "I am awake, and when I am awake I am always thinking of her." Then most times she would inquire, "Number 11, dear, which do you think of most, the little one or her father?" Whereto I would reply, "I think of both alike, dear, for whenever I look at her, the fair young angel in heaven, she seems to be lying in her father's arms." And after we had conversed so, number 22 would be quiet for a few minutes, and often in the silence of the night I could at such times hear that which informed me the poor woman was weeping to herself, in such a way that she was happier for her tears. But my malady progressed unfavourably. Each succeeding night was worse to endure, and the morning light, instead of bringing refreshment and hope, only gave to me a dull, gloomy consciousness that I had passed hours in delirium, and that I was weaker and heavier in heart, and more unlikely than ever to hold my head up again. They cut all the hair off my head, and put blisters at the back of my neck, but the awful weight of sorrow and the gnawing heat kept on my brain all the same. I could no longer amuse myself with looking at what went on in the ward. I lost all care for the poor woman who lay in the next bed, and soon I tossed to and fro, and heeding nothing of the outer world except the burning and aching and thirst and sleeplessness that encased me. One morning I opened my eyes and saw the doctor standing between me and number 22 talking to the nurse. A fit of clearness passed over my understanding, such as people suffering under fever often experience for a few seconds, and I heard the physician say softly to the nurses, "We must be careful and do our best, sister, and leave the rest to God. They are both very ill. This is now the 4th day since either of them recognized me. They must have more wine and brandy to help them through. Here, give me their boards." On this the nurse took down the boards and handed them one after the other to the physician, and he, taking a pen from a clerk, who always attended him, wrote his directions on the papers and handed them back to the nurse. Having seen and heard all this, I shifted in my bed, and after a few weak efforts to ponder on my terrible condition, and how awful a thing it is to die, I fell back into my former state of delirium and half-consciousness. The next distinct memory I have of my illness was when I opened my eyes and beheld a wooden screen standing between me and the next bed. My head felt as if it had been put into a closely fitting cap of ice, but apart from this strange sensation I was free from pain. My body was easy and my mind was tranquil. My nurse was standing at the foot of my bed and looking towards me with an expression of solemn tenderness, and by her side was another woman, as I afterwards found out, a new nurse, unaccustomed to the ways of the hospital. "What is that screen there for?" asked the novice. My nurse lowered her voice and answered slowly, "Number 11, poor soul, is dying. She'll be dead in half an hour, and the screen is there so that number 22 mayn't see her." "Poor soul," said the novice. "May God have mercy upon her." They spoke scarcely above a whisper, but I heard them distinctly, and a solemn gladness, such as I used to feel when I was a young girl at the sound of church music, came over me at learning that I was to die. Only half an hour, and I should be with baby and Richard in heaven. Mixed with this thought, too, there was a pleasant memory of those I had loved and who had loved me, of Sister Martha and her husband and children, of the doctor who had been so good to me and brought me to the hospital, of my lady in India, and many others, and I silently prayed the Almighty with my dying heart to protect and bless them. Then passed through me a fluttering of strange, soft fancies, and it was revealed to me that I was dead. By and by the physician came his round of the ward, stepping lightly, pausing at each bed, speaking softly to nurses and patients, and, without knowing it, making many a poor woman entertain kinder thoughts than she had ever meant to cherish of the wealthy and gentle. When he came to the end of the ward, his handsome face wore a pitiful air, and it was more by the movement of his lips than by the sound of his mouth that I knew what passed from him to the nurse. "Well, sister, well," he said. "She sleeps quietly at last, poor thing. I hope and believe the next life will be a fairer one for her than this has been." "Her sister has been written to," observed the nurse. "Quite right. And how is the other?" "Oh, number 22 is just the same. Quite still, not moving at all, scarcely breathing, sir." "Huh. You must persevere. Possibly she'll pull through. Goodbye, sister." Late in the evening my sister Martha came. She was dressed in black, and led with her hand Rhoda, her eldest daughter. Poor Martha was very pale, and worn and ill. When she approached the bed on which I lay, she seemed as if she would faint, and she trembled so painfully that my kind nurse led her behind the screen so that she might recover herself out of my sight. After a few seconds, say 2 minutes, she stood again at the foot of my bed, calmer but with tears in her eyes, and such a mournful loveliness in her sweet face as I had never seen before. "I shouldn't have known her, nurse," she said, gazing at me for a short space, and then withdrawing her eyes. "She is so much altered." "Ah, dear," answered the nurse, "sickness alters people much, and then death more." "I know it, nurse, I know it. And she looks very calm and blissful. Her face is so full of rest, so full of rest." The nurse fetched some seats, and made Martha and Rhoda sit down side by side, and then the good woman stood by them, ready to afford them all comfort in her power. "How did she bear her illness?" inquired Martha. "Like an angel, dear," answered the nurse. "She had a sweet, grateful, loving temper. Whatever I did for her, even though my duty compelled me to give her pain, she was never fretful, but always concealed her anguish, and said, 'Thank you, dear, thank you, you are very good. God will reward you for all your goodness.' And as the end came nigher, I often fancied that she had reasonable and happy moments, for she would fold her hands together and say scraps of prayers which children are taught." "Nurse," replied my sister after a pause, "she and I were the only children of our father, and we were left orphans very young. She was 2 years older than I, and she always thought for me and did for me as if she had been my mother. I could fill whole hours with telling you all the goodness and forbearance and love she displayed to me from the time I was little or no bigger than my child here. I was often wayward and peevish, and gave her many hours of trouble. But though at times she could be hot to others, she never spoke an unkind word to me. There was no sacrifice that she would not have made for me, but all the return I ever made was to worry her with my evil, jealous temper. I was continually imagining unchristian things against her, that she slighted me, that because she had a mistress who made much of her, she didn't care for me, that she didn't think my children fit to be proud of. And I couldn't keep all these foolish thoughts in my head to myself, but I must needs go and speak them out to her, and irritate her to quarrel with me. But she always returned smooth words to my angry ones, and I never had a fit of my unjust temper but she charmed me out of it, and showed me my error in such a way that I was reproved without too much humiliation, and loved her more than ever. Oh, dear friend, dear good nurse, if you have a sister, don't treat her as I did Abigail, with suspicion and wicked passion, for should you, all the light speeches of your forwardness will return to you, and lie heavy on your heart when hers shall beat no more." When Martha had said this she cried very bitterly, and as I lay dead on my bed and listened to her unfair self-reproaches, I longed to break the icy bonds that held me, and yearned to clasp her to my breast. Still, though I could neither move nor utter a sound, it thrilled me with gladness to see how she loved me. "Mother," said little Rhoda softly, "don't cry. We shan't be long away from Aunt and her baby, for when this life is done we shall go to them. You know, Mother, you told me so last night." I was not permitted to hear any more. A colder chill came over my brain, and, wrapped in unconsciousness and deep stillness, I lay upon my bed. My next recollection is of beholding the grey dawn stream in through the half-opened windows, and of wondering, amid vague reminiscences of my previous sensations, how it was that a dead person could take notice of the world it moved in when alive. It is not enough to say that my experience of the last repose was pleasant to me. I was rejoiced and greatly delighted by it. Death, it seemed then, was no state of cold decay for men to shudder at with affright, but a condition of tranquillity and mental comfort. I continued to muse on this remarkable discovery for an hour and more, when my favourite nurse reappeared to relieve the woman who had taken the night watch, and approached me. "Ah!" she surprised me by saying, as a smile of congratulation lighted her face. "Then you are alive this morning, dear, and have your handsome eyes wide open." This, in my opinion, was a singularly strange and inappropriate address, but I made no attempt to respond to it, for I knew that I was dead, and that the dead do not speak. "Why, dear heart," resumed the nurse, kneeling by my side and kissing me, "can't you find your tongue? I know by your eyes that you know me. The glassy stare has left them. Come, do say a word, and say you are better." Then a suspicion flashed across my brain, and raising my right hand slightly, I pointed to the bed of number 22 and asked, "How is she? How is she?" "Don't frighten yourself, dear," answered the nurse. "She isn't there. She's been moved. She doesn't have that bed any longer." "Then it is she who is dead, nurse, and all the rest was a dream? It is she who is dead?" "Hush, hush, dear. She has gone to rest." Yes, it was all clear to me. Not I, but my unfortunate companion had died, and in my delirious fancy I had regarded the friends who came to see her and convey her to the grave as my sister Martha and her little daughter Rhoda. I did not impart to the nurse the delusion of which I had been the victim, for, as is often the case with the sick, I was sensitive with regard to the extreme mental sickness into which I had fallen, and the vagaries of my reason. So I kept my secret to the best of my power, and having recognised how much better I was, how the fever had quitted my veins and the weight had left my head, I thanked God in my heart for all his mercies, and once more cherished a hope that he might see fit to restore me to health. My recovery was rapid. At the end of a fortnight I was moved into the convalescence ward, and was fed up with wine and meat in abundance. I had every reason to be thankful for all the kindness bestowed on me in the hospital, and all the good effect God permitted that kindness to have. But one thing troubled me very much, and cut me to the quick. Ever since I had been in hospital, my sister had neither been to see me nor sent to inquire after me. It was no very difficult business to account for her neglect of me. She had her good qualities. Even in the height of my anger I could not deny that. But she was of a very proud high temper. She could sacrifice anything but her pride for love of me. I had gone into a hospital, had received public charity, and she hadn't courage to acknowledge a sister who had sunk so low as that. But if she was proud, so was I. I could be as high and haughty as she, and, what was more, I would show her that I could be so. What, to leave her own sister, her only sister, who had worked for her when she was little, and who had loved her as her own heart? I would resent it. Perhaps fortune might yet have a turn to make in my favour, and if so, I would in my prosperity remember how I had been treated in my adversity. I am filled with shame now, when I think on the revengeful imaginations which followed each other through my breast. I am thankful that when my animosity was at its height, my sister did not present herself before me, for had she done so, I fear that without waiting for an explanation from her, I should have spoken hasty words that, however much I might have afterwards repented them, and she forgiven them, would have rendered it impossible for us to be again the same as we were before. I never mentioned to anyone, nurse or patient, in the convalescent ward, the secret of my clouded brows, or let out that I had a friend in the world to think of me or to neglect me. Hour after hour I listened to women and girls and young children talking of home pleasures and longing to be quite well and dismissed from the confinement of the hospital, and anticipating the pleasure which their husbands or mothers or sisters or children would express at welcoming them again. But I never gave a word of such gossip. I only hearkened, and compared their hopes with my desolation, morosely and vindictively. Before I was declared perfectly restored, I got very tired of my imprisonment. Indeed, the whole time I was in the convalescent ward my life was wearisome, and without any of the pleasures which the first days of my sickness had had. There was only one inmate of the ward to which I was at first admitted, and yet amongst the convalescents none of them knew me unless it was by my number, a new one now, for on changing my ward I had changed my number also. The nurses I didn't like so well as my first kind attendant, and I couldn't feel charitably, or in any way as a Christian ought to feel, to the poor people by whom I was surrounded. At length the day came for my discharge. The matron inquired of me where I was going, but I would not tell her. I would not acknowledge that I had a sister, partly out of mere perverseness, and partly out of an angry sense of honour, for I was a country-bred woman, and attached to the thought of going into a hospital a certain idea of shame and degradation, such as country people attach to going on the parish, and I was too proud to let folk know that my sister had a sister in hospital, when she clearly flinched from having as much said of her. Well, finding I was not in a communicative humour, the matron asked no more questions, but, giving me a bundle containing a few articles of wearing apparel and a small donation of money, bade me farewell. Without saying half as much in the way of gratitude as I ought to have said, I walked out from the hospital garden into the wide streets of London. I did not go straight to my old lodgings, or to the house of the doctor who had been so kind to me, but I directed my steps to an inn in Holborn, and took a place in the stage-cart for Stratford. As I rode slowly to my sister's town, I thought within myself how I should treat her. Somehow my heart had softened a great deal towards her during the last few days. A good spirit within me had set me thinking of how she had helped me to nurse my husband and baby, how she had accompanied me when I followed them to their graves, how she and her husband had sacrificed themselves so much to assist me in my trial. And the recollection of these kindnesses and proofs of sisterly love, I am thankful to know, made me judge Martha much less harshly. Yes, I would forgive her. She had never offended me before. She had not wronged me 7 times, or 70 times 7, but only once. After all, how much she had done for me! Who was I, that I should forget all that she had done, and judge her only by what she had left undone? The stage-cart reached Stratford as the afternoon began to close into evening, and when I alighted from it, I started off at a brisk pace, and walked to my sister's cottage that stood on the outskirts of the town. Strange to say, as I got nearer and nearer to her door, my angry feelings became fainter and fainter, and all my loving memories of her strong affection for me worked so in me that my knees trembled beneath me, and my eyes were blinded with tears, though if I had trusted my deceitful, wicked, malicious tongue to speak, I should still have declared she was a bad, heartless, worthless sister. I reached the threshold, and paused on the step before it just to get my breath, and to collect as much courage and presence of mind as would let Martha know that, though I forgave her, I was still fully aware she might have acted more nobly. When I knocked, after a few seconds, little Rhoda's steps pattered down the passage and opened the door. Why, the child was in black. What did that mean? Had anything happened to Martha or her husband or little Tommy? But before I could put the question, Rhoda turned deadly white and ran back into the living-room. In another instant I heard Tommy screaming at the top of his voice, and in a trice I was in the room, with Martha's arms flung round my neck, and her dear blessed eyes covering me with tears. She was very ill in appearance, white and haggard, and, like Rhoda and Tommy, she too was dressed in black. For some minutes she could not speak a word for sobbing hysterically. But when at last I had quieted her, and kissed Rhoda and cosseted Tommy till he had left off screaming, I learnt that the mourning Martha and her children wore was in my honour. Sure enough, Martha had received a notice from the hospital of my death, and she and Rhoda had not only presented themselves at the hospital and seen there a dead body which they believed to be mine, but they had also, with considerable expense, and much more loving care, had it interred in the Stratford churchyard, under the impression that in so doing they were offering me the last respect which it would be in their power to render me. The worst of it was that poor Martha had pined and sorrowed so for me that she seemed likely to fall into some severe illness. On inquiry, it appeared that the morning when iron number 22 was so much the worse, and the doctor altered the directions of our boards, the nurse by mistake put the number 22 board over my bed, and my board, number 11, over the bed of the poor woman who had died. The consequence was that when the hospital clerk was informed that number 11 had died, he wrote to the doctor who placed me in the hospital, informing him of my death, and the doctor communicated the sad intelligence to my sister. The rest of the story you can fill up so for yourself, and without my assistance you can imagine how it was that, while in a state of extreme exhaustion and deeming myself dead, I heard my sister, in a strong agony of sorrow and self-reproach, say to my nurse, "Oh, dear friend, dear good nurse, if you have a sister, don't treat her as I did Abigail, with suspicion and wicked passion, for should you, all the light speeches of your forwardness will return to you, and lie heavy on your heart when hers shall beat no more." End of Number 11, A Hospital Story, from a book about doctors by John Cordy Jefferson. Read by Beth Thomas.
Psalm 11, King James Version. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 11th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psalm 11. In the Lord put I my trust. How say ye to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For, lo, the wicked bend their bow, they make ready their arrow upon the string, that they may privily shoot at the upright in heart. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple, the Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids try, the children of men. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth. Upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire and brimstone, and an horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. For the righteous Lord loveth righteousness. His countenance doth behold the upright. End of Psalm 11, King James Version.
Sonnet 11 by William Shakespeare. This is a LibriVox recording, read in honor of the 11th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. As fast as thou shalt wane, so fast thou growest in one of thine, from that which thou departest. And that fresh blood which youngly thou bestow'st, thou mayst call thine when thou from youth convertest. Herein lies wisdom, beauty, and increase. Without this, folly, age, and cold decay. If all were minded so, the time should cease, and 80 year would make the world away. Let those whom nature hath not made for store, harsh, featureless, and rude, barrenly perish. Look, whom she best endowed, she gave the more. Which bounteous gift thou shouldst in bounty cherish. She carved thee for her seal, and meant thereby thou shouldst print more, not let that copy die. End of Sonnet 11 by William Shakespeare. Read by Winston Tharp.